Is living with yourself an accurate portrayal of male depression? I'm Jonathan Hetterly. Welcome to Psych Cinema. In today's episode, I'm going to explore some of the common features of male depression. I'm going to look at male insecurity and how that impacts their life. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up by looking at the happiness trap that plagues America. But before we do me a favor, subscribe to our channel. Let's start with male depression. Now, spoiler warning, if you haven't watched the show, pause this video and go watch Living With Yourself, then come back because we are going to touch on some of the themes and plot points of the Netflix series. So Paul Rudd in this show starts out as quite unlikable. And in a lot of ways, whether or not you read him as depressed may impact how much you actually care or sympathize with him. Because in some ways, what we're seeing is a pretty neurotic, middle-aged man that's not particularly empathetic of other people or sympathetic. But in a lot of ways, it highlights some of the accurate understanding of male depression versus general overall depression. What you tend to see is him losing interest in the important things in his life. You see that he's no longer connected to his job, and in fact, his performance is starting to be noticed by everybody else. But you see a drift also away from his wife, Kate. And a lot of times this is what we observe with male depression. It's not necessarily overtly emotional, although that certainly can be the case. It's that there's this numbing. It's that there's this flatness to everyday life. What you also see, though, is increased irritability and unhappiness. So when we look at Miles, he shows that little things just agitate and annoy him. People start to really get on his nerves. And on an everyday occurrence, you might just assume that that person is just sort of high-strung or just unpleasant. But have we ever considered that a person might actually be depressed and that we're not seeing some of those more traditional or stereotypical signs of depression in terms of not being able to get out of bed, increasingly sad, crying, tearful? You don't see that with a lot of men. You certainly don't see that with Miles, but you see that disconnect and distance from his life. You know, one of the challenges that folks with depression often struggle with is that depression can make someone seem more neurotic, more self-absorbed, less empathetic and caring for other people. And without that lens of mental illness, of depression, people might view someone as having some character defects, of not particularly caring or sympathetic. But it may not be the case. It may just be that they really are struggling to connect with others because they're really struggling to connect with themselves and their own life. And we see that with Miles. He is incredibly crippled with self-loathing. The whole premise of the show, by having a clone version of Miles, a happier Miles, is he can't stand him. Happier Miles makes his life better, and that makes him so agitated and irritated and envious and jealous, because at the heart of Miles' depression, at the heart of a lot of people's depression, is deep self-loathing. But let's talk about this idea of men and insecurities, because there is this inner conflict of unhappy Miles and clone Miles, to where the show really operates in them competing against one another for this one life that they live, this one job, this one spouse. And what we see is that even though a happy Miles makes his entire life better and happier, he's more successful at his job. He creates a spark and an attraction in his wife. People like him. He's funny. He's a better screenwriter for the screenplay that Miles has been laboring at for years and years and years and years. But what we see is that instead of making original Miles' life better, he becomes more deeply insecure and paranoid because there's a better version of himself, and now he recognizes, or he feels, quite inadequate in his own life. And this show really captures the essence of men and their insecurities, so that even when his life can get better, there's a self-sabotaging nature of this show, that he doesn't know what to do with a better life, or no matter how happy his life is Miles' insecurities is going to inevitably sabotage it for him. And this show really operates both with Miles, but also even with Kate. what we see with Kate in terms of a husband that's unhappy, he's insecure, but he's not really open to change. He pushes people away. He doesn't really open himself up to things that could help him. And we see in this show what lengths men will go to for their own insecurities and unhappiness. For Miles, it's spending $50,000 of his money, hiding it from his wife, to go to a spa that's supposedly going to guarantee him becoming happier with himself. We even see this insecurity element with Kate's job, in that she works in architecture and design, and she has this tantrum-throwing tech mogul who, no matter what Kate and her partner offers in terms of their business, he's never happy. He nitpicks. He's always comparing it to all of these other high-end successful people, to the point where Kate just explodes at him and basically says, because you're such an insecure little twat, no matter what you do, you're never going to be happy with yourself because you compare yourself to other people. And no matter how fancy of a house, no matter how much money you make, you're going to be unhappy at your inner core. And that's what this show really explores, or it examines, is whether it's that side character of Kate's business or her husband Miles, is that no matter what, there's not happiness within him. You even see this with the subplot about Kate and Miles trying to conceive for a child, that he's avoiding his appointment. Does he think he's a good enough father? Or is his unhappiness and his insecurity to the point where he doesn't feel it's responsible to bring another person into his life if he generally believes it won't make him any happier and he has nothing to offer a child or a family? And that really is at the crux of this show, which is creative, but there's not a lot of new territory that this show explores, because it ultimately is about our endless pursuit of happiness. And you see that even if there is a happy version of Miles, that it doesn't permeate him. He's not happier. In fact, in episode 3, he visits his half-sister, and he's sharing all this happiness in his life, that his job is successful, there's a spark in his marriage, his screenplay is better, and he asks, why in the world can't I be happy? And his half-sister looks him in the eye and says, because you haven't earned it. And that really speaks to volume about our pursuit of external happiness, of things, or just putting ourselves in some type of environment where we think it's what we want or need to be happy. So this show really examines, at the heart, internal contentment versus external happiness. Miles isn't happy because he's not participating in creating his own happiness. In psychology, that's what we call an internal locus of control. It's that belief that our choices and decisions have the most power to usher in the outcome and a happy life. And those people that don't feel like they have an internal locus of control, it's an external. That means that no matter what they do, they feel like they don't have a lot of power in their own life and decisions or happiness and unhappiness. And that's where Miles is. His life may be better, but he's not creating it, so therefore he doesn't experience it. And that's really at the heart of this show, is our endless pursuit of happiness versus internal contentment. That really goes to effort. And that's a challenge for folks that are depressed, because they feel like they have no more to offer and give. But it usually indicates that they are feeling quite hopeless, that anything they do can make their life better. And if you don't believe that you can make your life better, for a lot of depressed people, they find themselves asking, well then, why even try? Miles has stopped trying in his life, and he's in this trap. It's only through clone Miles that unhappy Miles sees that a happier life is possible, but he won't experience it if he doesn't create and put an effort and participate in it. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Living with Yourself and male depression. Do you think it's just another show that shows a hapless, unsympathetic man that puts him at the center of a story? Or do you think this show really opens up the possibility of having some empathy for men and depression, apart from them just being irritable and unhappy in their life? Leave your comments and thoughts below. We'd also love to hear from you any recommendations you have for shows or films that you'd like for us to tackle here on Psych Cinema. That's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'm Jonathan Hetterly, and I'll see you at the movies.